Welcome, everybody. Good to see you all. Good to have you with us. I have with me today Council Member Sheri Weiner. She's with District 22, has a long history of being in that district. And we're going to talk a little bit today about the council resolution or the proposed resolution that's going to be brought up at City Council very shortly, this coming Tuesday. I believe it's June 18th. And there's been a lot of talk about this resolution. It deals with the situation in Israel and Gaza and how that affects those of us here in Nashville, in the metro area, as well as in the Jewish community. So Sheri, welcome. Glad to have you with me.
Thank you.
So I guess let's just kind of kick it off. Tell us a little bit about the resolution and what you find particularly problematic in it, and then we can sort of unpack some of that.
So the nature of the resolution comes from a really good place, I think. The resolution was initiated by Zilphat. She enlisted the help of Jacob Kupin over this past weekend, and they crafted a piece of a resolution that actually speaks to the conflict and wanting to see an immediate engagement of humanitarian aid. It speaks to the horrors that the people in Gaza are experiencing day in and day out. It references the hostages, and it is meant to express solidarity and concern with the folks over there, as well as the people here that are impacted. My issues with it. I think that there is not a balanced approach. I believe that when I am looking at legislation and I'm vetting the proposals that are presented to us, I do it with my eyes and through a lens that reflects the people that will be affected by the legislation. For example, if it's zoning, if this is a zoning issue, I look at it through the eyes of the neighbors. How is this legislation going to impact the neighbors? And so in this case, I read it first just at face value. And then I start putting my different lens on it. And so as this unfolded and I started reading through it, I first looked at it as if I was a resident in Gaza or a family member of a resident in Gaza. And then I looked at it as a hostage and as best I could, and the family member of a hostage. And as you know, I've had the opportunity to sit in and visit with two siblings of hostages. And again, and this is dramatic, but I had to do it. How would I feel if I was the woman or the family of the woman who was brutally tortured, raped, and presented on Facebook? And then I asked myself some questions. What does this solve? What message does this send? And how does this help each of those categories of people? And I had a real hard time answering those questions, especially with this and the way this is crafted. Does it really address the horror that was faced by the Israelis who were mercilessly raped, tortured, murdered, and those that were kidnapped and are still under captivity? Does it mention anywhere that we stand for peace all over the world? Does it mention anywhere that we stand against leaders of countries that attack peaceful nations, and that we stand in solidarity with the citizens of both Israel and Gaza? You know, it does address the impact on the residents of Gaza, but it doesn't clearly address the fate of the hostages that need to be at home with their families and alive. Does it address the families of those hostages and those at the kibbutz that day who are now dead? It doesn't do that. It's not balanced. It doesn't address the millions of folks in the Middle East who continue to be at risk, in addition to the folks in Gaza, and they're at risk of escalation until all the hostages are home, until there's an end to hostilities and until humanitarian aid is delivered. And then I looked back at um, a previous resolution, and it was one that references Ukraine during that invasion back in 22. And one of the things that it put forth that I think is really important, that's a big piece of what's missing here, and that is, what can we do? What can we materially do to help the folks rebuild and move forward in whatever way they're able to manage? And there are charities that we can be promoting. There are charities that will be engaged in the rebuilding, not only of the physical structure, but of people's lives and rebuilding their spirit. None of that is in here. And so I have written a letter to the Metro Council that I've asked the Metro Council office to distribute this afternoon to all of my colleagues. I don't want to take anything away from the intent of this, because it does come from a good place. I've talked to Z twice about this. However, I think it misses the mark on some super important things that we all need to be mindful of. I have a client who is Palestinian. And the Monday after this happened, and we were to get on our weekly call, I started up Zoom, and there he was in tears. And he said, "I don't know what to say to you." He said, "This is not who we are. I don't know what to say to you." And we cried because it was such a hard place to be in. But we have to honor each other's pain, and there's not enough of that. And so that's my long answer to your short question.
Right. Well, and you're right. There are no easy answers, and there is no short answer for it. But the other question, and I appreciate your sort of sharing with us your views in a very specific way. Obviously, you've been very intentional and thoughtful in crafting this letter and in sort of sorting out your own feelings about it. A bigger question that I wanted to also ask you, and this would probably be a similar question for anybody on the council, but coming from the standpoint of a regular citizen who's looking at the council and what you're tasked with, how is something like this resolution effective? How is it an effective use of council time? And are these types of resolutions really valuable in the bigger scheme of what you have to do, which obviously is a lot of business and work on our behalf? So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
I have to answer that with a two-pronged approach. Number one, we are elected to do the business of Nashville. Part of that is budgetary, part of that is zoning, and part of that is constituent services. I fully believe that supporting our constituents and recognizing their hurt and informing folks about things that are out there, I think that's our responsibility. However, we also have so much on our plate. And again, I want to go back. This comes from a really good place. It comes from a place of Z wanting to kind of calm the waters, because there's lots of tension in the room. And she wants to essentially kind of put this to bed and just get it out there so we can move on and do our job. And I get that. I want us to put it, though, in its perspective, that this is not our authority, that a non-binding resolution from a local government entity as the Metro Council has zero impact. It will not change any minds. It will not impact anything other than we have put ourselves out there. That's what this does. And it may make people that are directly impacted feel better, and that's great. But it's essentially, it's not our job.
Yeah, and I'm also kind of curious, just in terms of the process of this whole thing. You have been in the council for a long time, and as you have mentioned, you've got long history of relationships with people like Councilmember Suara and others. you've also been a pretty outspoken advocate of the Jewish community here, just even as a person in the community. And I know that a lot of folks look to you as sort of a, a leader in that right. Were you involved in the crafting of this? Did anybody approach you and say, "Hey, do you want to help us?" As I know they did with Council Member Coupin?
No, I was not informed about this until Councilmember Coopin brought me in a committee room Tuesday night before the council meeting and told me. And
And
then I heard from
what's that
Zoltan at the
been?
end of the meeting.
Yeah. So what's that been like for you? How have you felt about all of the way this has unfolded? Obviously, from a intellectual perspective and sort of taking a business-like approach to it, you've got that down. But as I say, you've been, you're very closely involved in the Jewish world as well as in the council world and the business world. And so I'm just kind of curious if you can share a little bit about how this hits you as a human being.
I'm very process oriented. And when I'm doing the work in the council, it takes a lot to get me emotionally charged about something. And the things that emotionally charge me are things that are going to take things away from our security, our safety, things that are going to impact families. Whether somebody calls me to include me in the writing of a piece of legislation, that's on them. If they choose to do that, that's fine. If they choose to go around me because they don't think I'm going to like what they're presenting, I can't change that. So it is what it is. I mean, I can't worry about it.
Well, good to have a grown up in the room, I guess, at this point. So, when you talk about, the divisions and the pain that our community is feeling, there's a lot of people in our community who aren't connected to this issue and aren't necessarily even connected to the news. So we feel it, we're very focused on it. The Jewish world is focused on it. Obviously, the Muslim world is. And people who are sort of politically plugged into the work of the council. But what would you say to those constituents out there who might be listening, who are like, what is this? What is this all about? Is it much ado about nothing? What's the real, you talked about the significance in terms of the council business, but how does this filter out into the culture of our city and the culture of our Jewish community here as we move forward through what undoubtedly is going to continue to be a long, painful uh, situation with a lot of suffering on both sides?
So I think that when I address questions like that, I have to look at the makeup of Nashville. In my district, in 22, we have quite a diverse population across multi-ethnic nationality, religious stripes, um, and that's pretty well mirroring Nashville as a whole. So within the council, we have to be mindful of that, and we have to be mindful not to pick and choose favorites. We have to be mindful not to pick and choose who we're going to support and what that balance is going to be. And sometimes it's a tightrope, when you have a conflict like this, which makes it harder. That's one of the reasons that I'm uncomfortable with the language in this particular resolution, because I think it doesn't go far enough to address a balanced, greater bandwidth scope.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I have seen the resolution, and you're right. I think, it leaves out things that someone in your position might want to add in and provide a little bit of that balance you're looking for. Anything else that you want to talk about or add that I haven't asked you at this point in time regarding this resolution or any of the implications of it?
I think we've covered it. I really think we've covered it.
Well, great. Thank you so much. I want to thank you, Congressmember Sheri Weiner of District 22 for Metro Council. I know this is a very busy time for all of us, and I appreciate you taking some time for us today. And obviously, the situation will continue to unfold, and we will hope to keep the lines of communication open with you.
Thank you. Anytime.